Joining us is retired U.S. Navy Captain Chuck Nash right now. Captain Nash, thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure, Maria. Good morning.
Your reaction to all of this?
Well, I think the rhetoric is certainly heating up, but the one thing I think the president's trying to do is that message was not only for North Korea. That message was clearly aimed at China, which is the United States will use every weapon and any weapon in its arsenal should the North Koreans unleash theirs. This is not going to be a static situation that moves gradually. He's trying to remove the ambiguity, and he's telling the world exactly what he intends to do. If the North Koreans were to attack the South or Guam or any of our allies, we are going to step in and we're going to use any and all capability that we have to rectify that situation and bring it to a quick conclusion.
Captain, you're a Navy guy, so I want to ask the Navy's role in this. Clearly, there have been indications that the fleet's been moved in position. What's the Navy's capacity in trying to contain or eliminate a nuclear threat from North Korea?
Well, there's, of course, the presence, which you just talked about, which is positioning forces. Then there's the defensive, which is the Aegis system at sea, which can take out nuclear weapons and missiles while they're en route, not during the launch phase, but during the mid-course phase. And then, of course, there's the offensive, which are the cruise missiles and, of course, our Navy carrier air wings that can deliver weapons ashore. So it is a presence, it's a pre-hostility capability. It is a defensive capability while at the same time can flex immediately into an offensive capability, far superior to anything that the North Koreans have.
Captain, it's Dagan McDowell. Are we jumping ahead, though, because there's been so much talk in the last 24 hours, given what we know now about the miniaturization of these warheads, the missile capability of North Korea? We're talking about military conflict, essentially, and we kind of lose the focus on increasing sanctions, not just on North Korea, but particularly China, which the Trump administration has shown a willingness to do, at least in a small way, putting sanctions on the Bank of Dandong, which I think happened just in the end of June.
There are sanctions, Dagan, that could have been in place that were not put in place, but a lot of those things are more toward the holistic side of things. Sanctions take time to take effect, and those effects have to be in place for a while before they really become acute enough to where it gets people's attention. So we talk a lot about sanctions. There are things that should have been done probably 10, 15 years ago. But you don't react, and we don't, at least not just in the United States, but I think it's in Western culture, that we don't react until things get so bad that then you really have to do something. But to your point, are we ahead of the game here? I think we are ahead of the game if you just take the rhetoric for what it is and don't look for what's happening on the ground. What's happening on the ground is everybody's positioned forces, the adults in the room, the Chinese and the Americans, understand the gravity of this situation. Kim Jong-un is playing a game that is dangerous in its rhetoric, but will he actually pull the trigger? If he does, that's the last event in his life.
Well, what about back in 1994, President Clinton faced a growing threat from North Korea. He reached a deal with Kim Jong-un's father, Kim Jong-il. The deal promised aid to North Korea in exchange for the country freezing its nuclear weapons program. Why don't you listen to this and get your reaction?
Okay.
This is a good deal for the United States. North Korea will freeze and then dismantle its nuclear program. South Korea and our other allies will be better protected. The entire world will be safer as we slow the spread of nuclear weapons.
What do you think about that, Captain Nash? President Clinton should have used military force in the 90s instead of diplomacy and deals?
I think what he did was he cut that almost bilateral deal to get there, and how'd that work out? Look at where we are now. The rhetoric there sounds almost identical to what Barack Obama said about the nuclear deal with Iran. So bad news does not get better with age, and we wait and we wait and we wait until it becomes so painful that then we have to do things that 15 years ago we never would have foreseen ourselves doing. But at the end of the kick the can down the road routine or metaphor, the road ends. And then what do? Somebody has to then put on the big guy pants and do the job. And that's where we are now. And the rhetoric is unsettling. But we're at the end of the road with these guys. They have miniaturized, according to our intelligence community, which has not had a really good batting average, by the way. So maybe they're wrong about this and it's a blessing. But they're saying now that they have perhaps miniaturized a nuclear weapon, as Dagan pointed out recently, and now are working on that capability to actually put it atop an ICBM, an intercontinental ballistic missile that could reach the United States. So the can's at the end of the road. Now, what are we going to do?
Captain, it's Mike Murphy. And I kind of put that question back to you a little bit. Is there a way to solve this North Korean crisis without the use of force? Is there some sort of a political way to work this out that would be satisfactory for the U.S., for China, for North Korea? Is that possible?
I don't think we can back away, Mike, from where we are now. The United States position cannot be softened at this point. What's going to happen is I think it's actually going to get tenser. And by that, I mean there are some longer-term things that could happen, not the least of which would be the Japanese walking away from Article 9 of their Constitution, which then goes into an offensive military capability. The Chinese realizing that if this guy does start something, the president just came out and removed all ambiguity about what we might do. So now the Chinese are looking at their partner right there, and they are partners, on their border, perhaps bringing about a remilitarized and possibly nuclear Japan. And when you look at the history of that relationship with those countries in the region, that should scare them. But the other thing that should scare them is the potential for a nuclear conflict on the Korean Peninsula right on their border.
Yeah, we just don't know where this is going. We don't know what this young leader in North Korea is going to do.
But the pressure, Maria, the pressure is there, and the pressure must remain there, and not like typical politicians over our past lifetime, where they try to use, this approach where we ratchet up and then we move back. Look at that whole thing about gradual escalation in Vietnam. It was a disaster. It prolonged that war. Look at where we are now. In October, we'll be 16 years into Afghanistan.
Wow.
There is a point where we have to do things, we have to ratchet them up, and then not back down. And I think anybody, whether you are a Trump supporter or not, realizes this guy does not back down. So we are where we are. It's not going to go backwards. Where does it go forward? And that's where our adversaries, potential adversaries, they have to make that calculation.
Captain, thanks for weighing in this morning. We so appreciate your time.
My pleasure, Maria.
Captain Chuck Nash joining us.